So on to arc fault detection devices. So this is the regulation. So it's not much of it's not much detail in the book, not many lines. Arc fault detection devices conforming to the BS are recommended. Now that word recommended is a really important word and cannot be dismissed lightly in the 18th edition. It is recommended as a means of providing additional protection against fire in AC final circuits from the fire caused by arc faults. So what is an arc fault detection device? It's a brand new device which we are seeing in the UK. It is used in other countries throughout the world, but it is coming to the UK. It really is a device that kind of completes the safety aspect of an electrical system. We already have covered pretty well short circuits and overloads with fuses or circuit breakers. We have covered very well, of course, electrical shock protection via residual current devices. We are covering better and we are improving that protection as well with over voltages for surge protection devices. So what we don't have today is a device which will do something if there is a dangerous electrical arc in the circuitry or a piece of equipment that could initiate a fire. This is the job of the arc fault detection device. Here you can see Hager's version of this product. It's a product we have in our other markets, and it's a combined arc fault detection device with an MCB. So the regulations do give us some examples of where arc fault detection devices may have a use, and they also tell us actually if used the arc fault detection devices needs to be placed at the origin of the circuit to be protected. So you can't protect a whole distribution board with one arc fault detection device. Obviously there was other regulations which may fall foul of that if you did that as well. So one per circuit is generally the requirement, hence why the product is our product is an MCB and arc fault detection device combined. So examples of where such devices can be used include premises with sleeping accommodation, of course. You know, how many premises can we think of with sleeping accommodation? Houses, hotels, student accommodation, etc. Locations with a risk of fire due to nature of process of stored materials. So you see what's happening here. They're trying to, where there's installations with an increased risk of fire or an increased risk of damage of the consequence of that fire. Woodworking shops, etc., where the actual building itself is combustible, wooden buildings and things like that, fire propagating structures, tall buildings which could have a kind of a good chimney effect and aid the spread of a fire. And lastly, there are locations with endangering of irreplaceable goods like museums, where if there was a fire, you know, if you lose, you know, original artwork or things like that, you know, it's just gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. So it is irreplaceable. Now, the word, coming back to that word, recommended, okay, is important. Okay, so if we're going to recommend the use of arc fault detection devices, okay, we cannot dismiss that word lightly, and it is important that designers, installers do recommend to their customers that they would use arc fault detection devices in their installation. If they choose not to, then that's them choosing to ignore your recommendation. So what I'm really saying here is, as an installer, you may be a case that you need to give option 1, option 2 quotes to your customers and say, this is option 1 with arc fault detection devices. Explain to them a little bit. You know, there is guides on our website about what they do to give additional protection against fire. Option 1 with these devices is an increased cost, of course. Option 2 is these devices, is an installation without these devices, and let them make that choice, option 1, option 2. Including them, of course, is a high cost. Not including them is a lower cost, but it's lower protection, and that is the end user making that choice, not you as Mr. Installer or Mr. Designer. That is really important. You can imagine if you took that choice not to recommend these, and if there was a fire, you know, insurance companies get involved. At worst, an inquest organisation gets involved if people are killed. Okay, and I would not want to be standing somewhere where I was being asked, why did I not take that recommendation for these devices that could have stopped that fire occurring? Okay, so it is important, that section, that little part. So moving on, surge protection devices. Surge protection devices were introduced in the 17th edition, and as usual, slowly introduced, and for the most part actually in the 17th edition, you could have said they wasn't required unless we carried out a risk assessment determining they was desired or required. The regulations now, you can see 443.4, protection against overvoltage shall be provided. So the words have changed significantly now to shall, where the consequence could result in injury to or loss of a human life. So we can easily see places where surge protection devices are required there, hospitals and places like that, maybe in a domestic premises where someone's on some kind of life support at home, if you like, for end of life care. That is required now to have surge protection devices. Resulting interruptions of public services, things like, airport or railway stations information, lose the signage there and there's a serious interruption to public services. Resulting interruption of commercial activity, offices, places like this. If the computers don't work because of surge problems, that's us not working for the rest of the day. So this is a problem. So it has a serious interruption to commercial activity. And areas which may be affected by a large number of co-located individuals. What that means is a load of individuals live in a building, if you like. It could be a block of flats, it could be student accommodation, things like that. If a surge took out the fire alarm system or the door entry system, that affects a large number of individuals in that building. So that's where the 4 areas where it is required to install surge protection devices. Now, if your installation doesn't fit in there for whatever reason, I think most will, to be honest, fit in one of those 4, but if it doesn't fit in that area, for all other cases, this risk assessment shall be determined or shall be performed to determine whether transient overvoltage is required or protection is required or not. Okay, so it's important again we do a risk assessment. There is some words on the end of that section, however, except for single dwelling units where the total value of the installation equipment does not justify such protection. So it's not actually saying you don't have to do it, it's saying you have to justify or not the inclusion of surge protection devices. Now, a single dwelling unit where the total value does not justify such protection. The addition of surge protection to a consumer unit, if you like, for a single dwelling unit might cost maybe £100. I know that's actually probably more than the consumer unit itself might cost. But what is it protection? What is when we justify its protection? How much equipment nowadays do we have that could be damaged by a surge in a domestic property? How much is the TV we have nowadays? The big American Samsung, whatever, fridge, side-by-side fridge, dishwashers, washing machines, all sorts of other electronic equipment, game consoles in a house these days that would be damaged if a surge arrived at a property. Certainly many, many more times than that £100 worth of surge protection. So although they say it's not required for single dwelling units, it is still asking us to make some kind of justification, yes or no, whether we include for them. And again, it might be prudent for you guys to offer it to your customers and let them decide whether they want it or not. If they decide not to pay the extra £100 or whatever it is for this surge protection device, and there's a surge, it damages equipment, that's their problem then. They can't come back to you and say, well, you didn't tell me about this device, it would have stopped it happening. The risk assessment method a risk assessment method is given in 7671 as what appears to be a reasonably straightforward calculation. We're trying to calculate the calculated risk level in the, you can see at the bottom of the screen there, and it does give us some tables where we can pick values from, and the answer to that equation, whether it be more or less than 1,000, will determine whether we do or whether we should or should not have surge protection devices in our installation. Chapter 46 is this brand new chapter, if you remember, on isolation switching. It is a brand new chapter in the 18th edition. So it's about the requirements for adding or including for isolation switching in electrical installation. Now, you're going to say, we've always had isolation switching in electrical installation. Of course we have. So this information in here is not new. It was in section 537 in the 17th edition. It's now been taken that just to kind of align up with the harmonised document. So it makes it more in alignment with the European document rather than in the one section where we had it. So reading this, okay, you and me might have seen some deja vu here. Have I seen this before somewhere? Okay, so I looked back at some of my old editions of 7671. Actually, it wasn't even 7671. Oh, sorry, it was 7671 at the time. So that's a copy of my 16th edition of the wine regulations. And guess what the title of chapter 46 was? Isolation switching. So what seems to be going on here is that 16th edition took it away from chapter 46, and put it in together with other requirements in the 17th edition. The 18th edition's moved it back